There is so much sales advice out there for the taking, but how do you know what you can trust? Today I want to tell you about 5 killer sales tactics that are actually backed by science. Now before we jump in, if you're looking for some help on your sales prospecting, check out my free book linked down below. Now let's get into some B2B sales techniques you can actually trust. Number 1, how familiar does this sound? You're given a new territory or a large client and you haven't made any progress after a quarter. But then the questions start rolling in from your sales manager about your lack of pipeline, and you start responding with excuses from, they're just not getting back to me, I'm not getting any bites, I've tried everything, but nobody is responding. They must be working with another vendor or they have no budget. Man, this territory stinks. Now, obviously, if we've never spoken to a prospect, we have no idea if they have a budget or not, but it's a typical excuse salespeople make when they're struggling to make progress. While common, this situation is very preventable if reps would just stick with it longer. In fact, according to Zant.ai, which measures thousands of sales activities across their platform, they found that the sweet spot to make contact with a prospect in outbound sales is actually 8 attempts. Sadly, most salespeople give up after a shocking only 2 attempts. So when you perform outreach, stick to a plan of 6 to 10 attempts using a variety of communication mediums in a sequence or a cadence, and you'll drastically book your odds of booking more appointments. Now my next tip is to be intentional about the time of day when you do your sales prospecting. So if you're anything like me, early on in my sales career, I would just randomly pick up the phone and make sales calls throughout the entire day. Now I have to admit, in my B2B sales career, it worked really well early on because I just outworked people. But that only worked for so long. That was 12 years ago. Times have changed and our customers are busier than ever with more ways to prevent salespeople like you and me from contacting them. So we need to be smarter and more intentional about our prospecting, which is why it's so important to let data guide us to the right decisions on how we spend our time. I don't believe that salespeople should just have a phone glued to their ear all day long because 1, that's just not very fun. And while you do need to make a lot of sales calls to be really good at sales and make the income and commissions that you want, there's a better way, and that's to call when you have the greatest odds of reaching a prospect. And this is important to use the data to help us make these decisions because when you do start filling your calendar full of appointments, you're going to have to start balancing your time between new business development and client meetings when you're further along in your sales cycle. So for this killer tactic, we're going to leverage data from Zant.ai. As I mentioned before, Zant.ai is a sales development data-driven research company. And while I must say this is not a sponsored video, I'm very fond of their sales data and I recommend you check them out and get on their email list. They give tons of free sales data that will help you improve your sales game. Now back to the data. After examining millions of sales activities on their platform, Zant's research showed that the best time to perform outreach is between 8 and 9 a.m. and 4 to 5 p.m. Now this is very subjective to each person and each client, but generally speaking, this data definitely has merit. It's what I've actually been doing in my sales career for about the last 10 years, and it works really, really well. In fact, if it's a large enterprise client, I know that people are gonna be starting really early. Many times, I'll call between 7:30 and 8:30, which feels uncomfortable because we feel like we're calling too early. And there is a point when it does become too early. I certainly wouldn't recommend you call your clients and prospects at 6 or 6:30 a.m. unless you know that's their schedule and that's perfectly fine. But for most of my clients, and many of your clients, they're gonna be in meetings between 8 and 4 p.m. And so your best shot is gonna be before 8 or maybe 7 to 8 or 7:30 to 8:30 like I use. And then your next shot may not be till 4:30 or 5 o'clock when you actually have a window to get a hold of them. Now I think this goes without saying, but you need to test and track your progress. Use this data only as a guide. But chances are that it's a good idea to start with the recommendations in the video and pivot based on what works for your clients and your industry. Just remember to track it. Okay, on to number 3. In this tip, we're going to rely on research from another leader in sales development research. This time it's gong.io. Again, as a disclaimer, I'm not affiliated with Gong. This is not a sponsored video, but I am a huge fan of their research and the content they put out. I definitely recommend you check them out if you're not already, because again, just like Zant, they give out a ton of free information and it can drastically help you improve your sales. So with that said, let's get into the tip. Tip 3 is about how to better handle objections. Specifically, what the research shows is what the best sales reps did versus the worst sales reps when they were faced with an objection. Now, Gong's analysis was based on over 67,000 sales conversations they tracked on their platform. Not surprisingly, the best sales reps engaged in conversation, not debate, when faced with an objection, while the least successful reps debated with their customers about their position or their perspective and how it was essentially wrong. Unfortunately, this happens very often, and for most of us, including myself, we've been guilty of this more than we would like to admit. And for most sales reps, they get into complete debate mode when faced with an objection, as if they were personally attacked. But the best sales reps, in fact, don't see objections as a personal attack, nor do they see the objection as something they need to defend at all. Now you might be asking yourself is why? It's because they look at objections as a lack of understanding or just a different perspective that they need to better understand in order to help their client see it another way. And based on the data and my own experience, I can say without a doubt that the most effective way to do this is to ask insightful questions and help your customer come to the conclusion themselves. This is far more persuasive than showing them they were wrong in a debate. Nobody likes being told they're wrong. So next time you get an objection, engage instead. Okay, tip number 4 is very similar to tip number 2, that it's focused on the time we call, but this time more specifically the days of the week we call. I bet if you're watching this video, you have or you had a sales manager tell you to pound the phones and make more calls and engage in more activity. And we've all heard it before, and it's for good reason. Salespeople with a huge engine in prospecting produce more, plain and simple. The more opportunities you have is usually because you have more calls and more emails. And while you may or may not have the natural engine and just the stamina to make calls all day long, as I mentioned in tip number 2, and there's a much better way, and that's taking a data-driven approach. Zant's research data actually showed there's bad days and then the best days to make contact with prospects and clients. So naturally, we would want to call on the best days when we have the best odds to get a hold of people, rather than just randomly calling all day long and actually not being the most effective use of our time. Not surprisingly, current data suggests Monday and Tuesday and Friday were the worst days to perform outreach, as people are digging themselves out of a hole from the work that piled up over the weekend on Monday. Tuesday, they're getting out of that hole, and now they're beginning to get into their weekly activities and all the project work. And Friday, they're actually planning for the weekend, and they're less attentive and just overall less interested in taking a sales call. Whereas Wednesdays and Thursdays were the absolute best days to call based on the research. Now again, with all this in mind, if you have no pipeline or you're lacking business, use these days as a guide, but remember, data is great, but you have to test it in your industry and for your own personal style. While this data can be helpful, I found that I make great progress myself on Fridays, but only in the winter. Whereas in the summer, I don't have as good a luck because my prospects are shutting down and taking a long weekend. One way that I overcome this is I actually intentionally try to schedule time with my clients earlier on in the week, usually weeks in advance, for Fridays to spend time with them out of the office, whether that be golfing or some other outdoor activity. Obviously right now with the COVID-19 pandemic, it's a little bit different, but I did engage in outdoor activities even when we were quarantined because it was allowed to spend time on a golf course. It was one of the few things we could actually do safely. So again, use your time wisely and let the data help you make the right decisions to be most effective with your time. It's not necessary to call from 8 to 5 o'clock Monday through Friday because it's just not effective according to the research. And I'd be willing to bet that you're probably not doing anywhere close to that much sales prospecting to begin with, because if you were, you may not be watching this video, because if you are engaging in that much activity, it's likely that you're absolutely crushing it in the sales game and making tons of money. And finally, number 5, this tactic is one that is critical for salespeople, and that's showing your customers multiple options in the proposal phase. Research shows that we should give our customers a few options, with 3 being the magic number, to help make our jobs a bit easier, but also help our customers make the right decision for the outcome they're looking to achieve. And when this is anchored with business value, it helps propel your growth strategy with your customer. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, there have been many times in my career that I've gone all the way down to the wire on a deal with a customer, and I even think I've won, only to be stuck in a bidding war over one factor, and that factor is price. It sucks. And this is quite normal though for B2B sales professionals. They get stuck negotiating on only price because they didn't present any other options. And that was true for me many times earlier on in my career. And sometimes it still happens to this day, because sometimes the deal that I'm presenting, there aren't any other options I can present. It's just the one deal. And when that happens, you have to use other tactics in your negotiation. But for this tip, it's natural that when we feel like we're presenting our product or service, that it's superior to all of our competitors. The truth is though, that our clients don't always see it that way. In fact, our clients usually see salespeople and our solutions very much the same. Therefore, understandably, oftentimes most competitors usually offer a similar product or service as ours at a very similar price, which gives us virtually nowhere to go in our negotiations. And not only this, when you provide multiple options, it helps solve for the oftentimes many different conflicting customer interests when there's multiple people involved in a deal, which happens all the time in B2B sales versus B2C, when there's usually just 1 or 2 people involved. So this is a really important point. So next time you're proposing a solution to a customer, give them 3 options. If you can't give them 3, at least give them 2. Just make sure that each option is a viable solution for you and for your client, and you're perfectly okay with accepting any of the options they choose. Ideally, you want to brand and title each option back to the business problems you identified earlier in the sales process. So there you have it, 5 killer sales techniques you can trust, backed by science and research. If you're currently using any of these or you're planning on using them, please let me know in the comments below. And if you're looking for prospecting advice, be sure to check out my book linked in the description below. Thank you for watching, and if you did like this video, please subscribe, hit the notification bell so you know next time I drop a brand new video, and if you could, hit that like button. Thank you very much for watching. Sell smarter. Until next time.